Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. Now, before we begin, because in 2019, YouTube was caught data mining the information of underage users, therefore violating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA, they worked with the US government and reached a settlement where they implemented new policy meant to dodge responsibility and scapegoat creators, meaning that I have to ensure that everyone understands that this video is not meant for children. It is not marketed towards children. It is not advertised towards children. Doctor Who is a family show that kids can watch, of course. But this show is with all the shows, this video is with all the videos on my channel. Look at the show from an adult perspective, and therefore adult topics and themes will be discussed, so viewer discretion is advised. That being said, it is the 25th of October 2020, and we are starting to look at Loups-Garoux, another 5th Doctor and Turlough audio, one in the second of the 4 5th Doctor Turlough audios that this marathon is covering, which is written by Marc Platt, the first story that Marc Platt contributed to Big Finish. Now, Marc Platt is an author I adore. Stories that we've covered by him already have been great. They include The Skin of the Sleek from Spare Parts. He adapted all of Philip Hinchcliffe's work in the Philip Hinchcliffe Presents range. He adapted The Children of Seth, and of course there will be more and more things by Platt that we will cover, because he's done a lot. And by a lot, I do mean a lot. He is definitely one of those authors that you really can really sink your teeth into and really find yourself enjoying. But yes, Loups-Garoux is the first story written by Platt. It takes place in the future, and like many stories, is very much a story that has a message to say. It's one of those things where everything, there's it's just about one of those things where we open with an execution, or a failed execution, of this guy called Peter Stuba, who was a real historical figure who murdered people in the Black Forest, Germany, far into the past. 1589 is where everything where the story, dates it. He believed to be a werewolf. He was a werewolf. And interestingly, in the Doctor Who universe, he definitely had wolfish characteristics. The title of this story gives it away. Loups-Garoux is where it is essentially the French term for werewolf. I don't think it's entirely spelled that way. I think it's actually spelled with an S instead of an X at the end. But the point still stands. This is a story about werewolves. And Platt, even in this first episode, sets up the story really, really well by making the audience sort of examine what they think about werewolves. We're introduced to quite a few characters. The Doctor and Turlough don't do much they just, you have Eleanor Braun guest starring as this Lady Elena de Santos, who has a son who is sick. There's a Japanese doctor, Dr. Hayashi, who has essentially has come in to try to help this kid, even though he doesn't actually do much, sadly. Instead, just sort of being there, which, is fine. He's doing his best, but it's still not, the whole, you have everything brought to some sort of an idea. No, you have the questions asked and things creeping in, and it's nice and creepy as and you also have this girl, Rosa, who lost her grandfather and is sort of hunting them. It's the werewolves, it seems. And you have Peter Stuba back stalking Turlough. Mark Strickson actually has a really good performance here as sort of this really sort of rude alien version of Turlough, who's kind of off-center, and you have this great tense scene where the Doctor and Turlough are chased by dogs. Meaning a lot of things are creeping around the story, and the story's creeping towards something. It doesn't quite know what it is, but there's something. It's playing with the idea that there's something out there, and you better just keep an eye out, because that something is dangerous. Which I think is a really solid, of just about everything that the story can do. It's a very very is a very, very different sort of story where the story goes on, and like many Platt stories, this is a story that's filled with layers upon layers of subtext and questions about what exactly sort of Platt's going for here. What's not quite what's his point, but more of making you question sort of his theming. There's a very sort of almost art house style, even if it's not quite apparent, but you get sucked into this atmosphere. There's something going on, and the episode leaves you asking questions. While we have ask questions up to the point where you have this very, very normal part 1 cliffhanger, which I'm not going to be like, oh, how dare they do a part 1 cliffhanger that's normal. No, the part 1 cliffhanger works because it works very, very well. But it leaves you wondering, and it leaves you questioning, and you just sort of let yourself go back, and you get to see what the story is possibly doing. So overall, I'm going to have to give this first episode of Loups-Garoux a 9 out of 10. Okay, it is the 26th of October 2020. I just finished listening to part 2 of Loups-Garoux, this second episode that does several things that make you question motives and just be like, and ask, okay, what's the end goal? And almost more importantly, what is the Doctor telling us here? I I say that because this is a story where the Doctor knows more than he's letting on. He knows they're werewolves. Most of the episode is set on the train. A little bit with the character of Rose, a little more that she's, indeed hunting the werewolves. And she gets this scene with Peter Stuba, who she kind of, resists his charms. And he's a charming man. Nikki Hendry, who plays him, or is it Nikki Henson? I think it's Nikki Henson who plays him. Has charm, but it's very much a menacing charm. This is a character where you have something dark like this, the idea of just this dark character as the representation of almost fear and different this big representation of fear, which I think is really a really, really good, a really, really good representation, and something where the listener can definitely feel like, okay, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Why you would sort of follow this man. You have this idea that Liana de Santos is sort of one of his conversions into a werewolf, and there's this shared history. You also have the fact that Dr. Hayashi is lurking in the background for his own ends, essentially being evil. But one of the major themes of this audio kind of emerges in this episode, and that's the theme of facing essentially the darkness inside. It's such an interesting idea, and it's this team in particular is TARDIS team Platt uses to a good effect here to explore this specific theme. There's a long extended sequence, one where Turlough is basically toyed with by werewolves who mess with the perception of others. That's sort of a thing they can do. It's not, explained, why they can do it, but it's just, take that as a thing that they can do. And when you do that, you sort of realize, okay, because this is a thing they can do, you're asking yourself, what are they doing? They make Turlough, they make Turlough scared, and eventually they confront him with essentially a mirror of himself. And there's this idea of a shadow behind him, this evil shadow, looking at the darkness within, which is a very interesting sort of, it makes it an interesting shadow, and it makes for an interesting examination of Turlough as a character, because he is haunted by a past, by a very, very, very tormented past, a past that Turlough's kind of running from, and he kind of almost runs towards it in this audio. The mirror trick sequence is such a fascinating sequence, because the implication is he's going to turn him into a werewolf, and it doesn't ever get completed. And the Doctor here sort of waltzes into the situation, waltzes into these people's lives, and takes over with a snap. Elena de Santos immediately likes him, which is, again, that makes for some interesting drama, because it's like, why would you like him so much immediately? That's something different and something weird and something that we, don't entirely understand. And the Doctor sort of dances this dance around everyone in this story. Something very different for the Fifth Doctor to do, but something different, but simple enough that something simple enough that you get the sense of what these characters are going through and what they're dealing with, what their damage is, and who they can trust and who they can't trust. Like it's sort of treated as a reveal that Victor is a werewolf and werewolves are going on, but the Doctor sort of takes it in his stride, like he almost knew. You get the idea that the Doctor knew what knew what was going on, and kind of doesn't. And the big ending of this is Ileana dos Santos giving into her dark side when she finds out that Hayashi was working with someone. And this is a story where people die. Hayashi's assistant gets killed. The idea is that there's a creature on the train. Victor escapes and is a danger. The Doctor is we get the Victor's backstory that his father was a human. When his father died, he let his animalistic side take over. He couldn't control his emotions because of grief. Meaning that grief is kind of a big theme in this story, that we're dealing with how people focus on grief and loss and things of that interesting nature. So you get the grief. And I think this is a really, really good way for the characters to interact and kind of deal with this situation, as it were. You see everything, and it leads us on such a good note. This is one of those stories where you end on a high and you make the listener question what's going on. Still keep asking those questions in the back of your head, because they will come up later. It's not perfect. Again, some of the performances are odd. This is just what's going on. So, overall, I'm gonna have to give part 2 of Loups-Garoux a 9 out of 10. Okay, it's the 27th of October 2020. I just finished listening to part 3 of Loups-Garoux. This third episode is amazing. This is an episode where a lot of stuff happens, and what's happening is essentially an explanation as to basically the whole idea of the werewolves and of everything being this very, very pack-oriented society. We build up to this cliffhanger that isn't a typical cliffhanger. It's sort of a typical cliffhanger. It's a cliffhanger where we get to see the Doctor basically taken in as the prospective mate of Ileana dos Santos because of, it's the doctor. He's helping with her son, so you have him being tapped to be this, basically her mate, which makes for a very interesting solution, because that just sort of means that you don't really get to see everything that the story, can do. You see, you get to see what these characters are doing, and you get to see this idea that the Doctor is now going to have to break this woman's heart, essentially, which is actually kind of interesting, especially when you contemplate just with the knowledge that that Victor is pretty heavily implied to be killed. No, well, not killed, but in the worst danger. And you have the extra stuff with Peter Stuba, who comes into his own really as the villain here. And I use the villain in air quotes because, yeah, he's the villain and he's the typical villain, but he's also very much the crafty sort of, I'm actually doing things more disguised and being more of a hindrance than you think I am. I'm being more dangerous than you think, more evil than you think. Things that I really, really like, and I really like the way Nikki Henson plays the character, because you have this so much past history between these two characters that just builds atop of one another, so you get to see, okay, these characters have their differences and have their difficulties, but they all possibly have what could be a common enemy, and you have this gathering filled with so many emotions. Like, you have the entire farm burnt down because Peter Stu has created his, essentially, this master plan to be like, hey, here's how I'm gonna take over your life. So we're gonna do that. That's gonna be a thing that happens, which is already great. Well, you also have a lot with Rosa here, and Turlough. They meet each other as Turlough's flung from the train, and it creates this great dynamic between the two characters, because you have Rosa, who is sort of being played as sensible but also brash, and she attacks a werewolf. She sort of transforms into a were-jaguar thing. She's not like a were-jaguar, but she has like the powers of sort of a nature spirit is the big implication here, which is honestly a good idea. I like that that's what's being played around with, this whole idea of being part of nature and contributing to nature in that way, and being responsible for it in a way of you are sort of the spirit responsible. Something that I think is just done so well in this story. And Mark Strickson as Turlough really does impress here. He plays it very contemplative, very much coming to terms with the weirdness that is the fact that he basically let this wolfish side come out, and you had the idea that he could become a wolf, and he does that. He does have at least some darkness to face, even if it isn't standard. I really like what Mark Strickson brings to the table. It's a really good it is a really, really solid portrayal of the character, and just really good at making you think about who Turlough is, and who Turlough's alliances really are for, because Turlough is a character with many alliances, and you have doubts, and doubt creeps in very easily with the character, as you don't quite know where he might stand, or who he might actually be with, even this far, especially as we're getting closer to the point where he exits the series chronologically. So you have those questions being asked. This is also just such a thematic episode. Marc Platt pours over the themes and makes you question everything. So, overall, I'm gonna have to give part 3 of Loups-Garoux. Actually, it's a perfect episode. It makes you question things, it leaves you on a good note, makes you want more. So I'm gonna have to give it a 10 out of 10. Okay, it is the 27th of October 2020. I just finished listening to part 4 of Loups-Garoux, the final episode of this story. And an episode, and the weakest episode, but it's still great. This is still a brilliant story overall, if only for how much Marc Platt puts into what the story is doing, what he's trying to accomplish, and just what the idea is overall for this story. There's a lot here that gets very metatextual. And by that, I mean, it's one of those stories where you look at the metatext, and you have very different messages and methods of getting to those messages. Like, a lot of this story deals with environmentalism, but in a very different way. Like, the entire setting has been... the entire setting of the story has been an environmental wasteland in future Brazil, with the idea being that Brazil has become one of the closest thing to a world powers sort of government, which, is absolutely fine. I mean, it is part of the point of speculative fiction to speculate on the future. And like many Platt stories, this speculation is not a very positive speculation. It casts humanity in a bad light. And there's this whole idea of Peter Stupid literally being the big bad wolf from all the stories, and that's sort of his fate to have a reversal of the scene he had with Rosa in part 1, which is interesting. He sort of gets trapped in Rosa's mind, I guess, which is perhaps where the weirdness happens. Again, you would go very, very artsy. This is kind of an art house audio drama, if there could be such a thing, where you kind of have to just deal with the fact that reality is going to be questioned, and you're not going to understand what these questions are and why these things are happening necessarily. And that's fine. You can do a story like this, but I think it's also art house trying to wrap and trying to also be relatable and marketable, which is perhaps not the best. Not a good way of getting your story out there and making this something where you have the marketability aspect. I will say I definitely enjoy a lot of what Loups-Garoux does, and the setting is very evocative and very, very nice, and nicely realized by the sound design team. The musical score is gorgeous. Like, a lot of this story is just a gorgeous look at werewolves, literal werewolves. You know, not not anything, not anything super special, not anything super different, but a very important story nevertheless, in sort of giving us what we perhaps want, and perhaps bits of what we think we want when talking about this story. There's a lot of things there are a lot of things that you see happening, there's already the very, very different ideas here. The doctor being there to essentially ask if, not only if he has the right, but if there's enough there for him to really, really give us answers to the questions of who the doctor is, what the doctor means, and where the character might be going. You have something so different, where the plot is almost entirely about the doctor being and having this crisis of identity, and you see him being different and being new, and a different side of the character comes out, and it's something that I think is just really, really well written, and really explored really, really well with what the story's trying to do, even if it isn't perfect and doesn't have everything amazing. So overall, I'm going to have to give part 4 of Loups-Garoux an 8 out of 10. Of course, that being said, we add up the scores and average them out at the end of this episode to give Loups-Garoux a final score of 9 out of 10, making it a very, very high-scoring episode, though not quite perfect. And honestly, a really, really good showing from Marc Platt, really showing what Platt can be and do. So, thank you everybody for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. and hit the bell icon so you don't ever miss an upload. And join me next time we take a look at a Doctor Who audio that takes place, interestingly, in Russia with Doctor Who Singularity.